At 1 in the morning, the heavy oak doors of my parents' living room creaked open. I lay perfectly still on the velvet sofa, keeping my breathing slow and even. Through the darkness, I watched my mother Brenda tiptoe across the Persian rug. She bypassed the expensive silver decor and made a straight line from my leather tote bag resting on the coffee table. Her manicured fingers dug inside frantically, searching until she pulled out the heavy diamond-studded key fob to my brand new $150,000 Range Rover Autobiography. She did not know I was awake. She did not know I was watching her steal from me. When I sat up and asked what she was doing, she did not even flinch. She simply clutched the keys to her chest and snapped at me, saying my sister Chloe was in trouble with her husband and needed a getaway car. She told me not to be selfish because I had full coverage insurance anyway. I did not scream. I did not fight her for the keys. I just laid back down and smiled in the dark. Because what my mother was about to find out the hard way was that she had just handed my reckless sister the keys to her own destruction. And the car they were about to total did not belong to me at all. My name is Simone. I am 35 years old, and for my entire life I have been the scapegoat of my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member who thought you were weak. Growing up in an affluent suburban neighborhood in Atlanta, our family projected the ultimate image of Black excellence. My father Derek was a quiet man who kept his head down, but my mother Brenda ruled our sprawling brick estate with an iron fist and a deep obsession with appearances. Every Sunday she wore her finest custom hats to church, smiling for the community, while making my life miserable behind closed doors. In her eyes, my younger sister Chloe could do no wrong. Chloe was the golden child, the one with the lighter skin, the perfect hair, and the endless charm that manipulated everyone around her. I was the dark-skinned, quiet daughter who read too much and asked too many questions. Even when I moved away and built a highly successful career, my mother refused to acknowledge my achievements. She told everyone I was just a paper pusher at a boring corporate office. What she deliberately ignored was the fact that I am a senior insurance fraud investigator for one of the largest firms in the United States. I hunt down criminals for a living. I analyze lies, I follow the paper trail, and I destroy scammers. My family thought I was a naive clerk they could walk all over. This Thanksgiving, I made the mistake of agreeing to visit. I drove my newly purchased Range Rover, a reward to myself for a major promotion. The moment I pulled into the driveway, the envy radiating from my mother was palpable. She had the exact same model, only older, bought on a predatory financing plan just to keep up appearances with the neighbors. I knew for a fact she was drowning in debt. I also knew her insurance had lapsed a month ago because she could not afford the premium. But in her mind, I was still the unworthy daughter who did not deserve nice things. The tension in the house was thick all evening. Chloe had skipped Thanksgiving dinner entirely, claiming she was fighting with her husband Trent. Trent is a white tech bro who runs a shady cryptocurrency startup. He is arrogant, financially unstable, and constantly belittles our family. Yet my parents worship him because he presents an illusion of wealth and proximity to whiteness that my mother desperately craves. I knew Chloe was not actually fighting with Trent. I knew she was out partying and making terrible decisions exactly like she always did when things got slightly difficult. So, when my mother sneaked into the living room at 1 in the morning, snatching my keys, with zero remorse, a lifetime of resentment finally crystallized into absolute clarity. I sat up on the couch, the moonlight catching her startled expression. "Mom, what are you doing with my purse?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. She puffed up her chest, immediately going on the defensive. "Chloe just called," she hissed. "Trent locked her out of their accounts and she needs to leave their house right now. She needs a car. I am taking yours. You are stealing my car, so your 30-year-old daughter can run away from a fight," I replied. "Do not use that tone with me, Simone," she snapped back. her grip tightening on the sparkly key fob. "You have comprehensive insurance and an emergency fund. Chloe has nothing right now. You are single, you have no children, and you do not need to be anywhere tomorrow. Stop being so deeply selfish for once in your life. She is your sister." My father Derek appeared in the doorway tying his robe. He looked at my mother holding my keys, then looked at me, and true to form he chose the path of least resistance. "Just let her use it, Simone," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "We will bring it right back in the morning. Just go back to sleep." The audacity of it all was suffocating. They were willing to risk my property, my hard-earned asset, just to bail out the golden child from another one of her self-inflicted disasters. But my training as a fraud investigator had taught me one crucial rule: never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. I looked at my mother. I looked at the sheer entitlement burning in her eyes, the complete lack of respect for me as an adult, and the utter certainty she had that I would just submit like I always did when I was a child. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten to call the cops. I simply leaned back against the plush pillows of the sofa and crossed my arms. "Fine," I said softly. My mother scoffed, turning on her heel. "I knew you would see reason," she muttered, rushing out the front door into the cold November night to go rescue her precious Chloe. My father gave me a pathetic nod of thanks before scurrying back up the stairs. The heavy oak front door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dark living room. I listened to the sound of footsteps hurrying down the driveway. I waited for the beep of the car unlocking. But I felt no panic. I felt no anger. Instead, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I reached into the deep pocket of my sweatpants and pulled out the real key fob to my brand new Range Rover. I traced the smooth leather edges with my thumb. Earlier that afternoon, when I noticed my mother glaring at my car with pure jealousy, my instincts had kicked in. I knew she would try something. I knew Chloe would inevitably need a bailout. So while my mother was busy gossiping on the phone, I had taken the sparkly decorative shell off my key fob and swapped it onto the spare key of her own uninsured SUV. Through the window, I heard an engine roar to life. It was not the purr of my pristine vehicle. It was the slight rattle of my mother's car. She was in such a frantic rush to play the hero that she did not even look at the steering wheel. She did not even realize which car she was driving away in. I pulled the thick blanket up to my chin, feeling the most profound sense of peace I had felt in 35 years. "Take them, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "They are not my keys anyway." At exactly 7 in the morning, the fragile tranquility of our upscale Atlanta subdivision was violently shattered. It was not the gentle chime of the doorbell that woke the house, but the aggressive, rhythmic pounding of heavy fists against the mahogany front door. I was already awake, lying perfectly still in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the inevitable fallout. I threw off the heavy duvet, slipped my feet into my slides, and walked down the long carpeted hallway. When I reached the grand foyer, my father Derek was fumbling frantically with the deadbolt. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the brass knob. Through the frosted glass side panels of the door, the relentless strobing of red and blue police lights painted the interior walls in a chaotic, spinning rhythm. My mother, Brenda, was standing rigidly at the bottom of the sweeping staircase, clutching her expensive silk robe tightly around her waist. All the arrogant bravado she had displayed the night before had completely vanished. Her face was ashen, drained of every single drop of color, and her eyes were wide with a raw terror I had never seen in her before. The heavy front door finally swung open and the crisp morning air flooded the entryway. It brought with it the acrid, unmistakable stench of burnt rubber, leaked radiator fluid, and shattered fiberglass. I stepped past my trembling father and walked out onto the expansive concrete porch. The sight that greeted me was nothing short of a masterpiece of destruction. There, resting halfway across our meticulously manicured front lawn and halfway onto the neighboring property, was the SUV. The front end of the heavy vehicle was completely unrecognizable. The thick steel bumper was crumpled inward like a carelessly discarded soda can. The hood was buckled and twisted, forced upward into a jagged, unnatural peak. The expensive windshield was a dense web of opaque white cracks, and both front airbags were fully deployed, hanging limply from the dashboard and steering wheel like deflated balloons. But the path of destruction did not end on the grass. The SUV had violently plowed through the ornate white wooden fence that separated our property from our neighbor, Mr. Henderson. Splintered wood and decorative pickets were strewn across the pristine green turf like scattered matchsticks. And then there was the final devastating point of impact. The SUV had rammed headfirst into Mr. Henderson's brand new custom-ordered Tesla Model S. The sheer force of the collision had pushed the heavy electric vehicle several feet up the driveway, crushing its rear quarter panel inward and shattering the taillights into 1,000 glittering red fragments across the smooth pavement. Mr. Henderson, a retired corporate lawyer who proudly served as the president of our strict homeowners association, was standing on his porch in his bathrobe, his face purple with rage as he spoke to a police officer. As a senior insurance fraud investigator, my brain instantly shifted from the perspective of a spectator to the cold, analytical mode of a professional. I did not just see a car crash on a suburban lawn. I saw physics, velocity, liability, and catastrophic financial ruin. Based on the deep intrusion into the frame of the Tesla and the impressive distance the heavy wooden fence posts had been launched across the yard, the driver had to be traveling at least 45 miles per hour in a quiet 20-mile-per-hour residential zone. I scanned the pavement and noted the complete absence of skid marks leading up to the lawn. That meant the driver never even attempted to hit the brakes. They just barreled straight off the paved road, jumped the concrete curb, tore through the expensive landscaping, and slammed directly into the parked luxury car. It was incredibly reckless. It was borderline criminal. "Where is Chloe?" I asked quietly, not taking my eyes off the smoking wreckage on the lawn. My father flinched violently at the sound of my voice. "She is upstairs," he whispered, his voice trembling so much he could barely form the words. "She locked herself in the guest bathroom down the hall. She is terrified, Simone. She is crying her eyes out. You have to understand, she is just a girl. She made a terrible mistake because she was under so much emotional stress. A 30-year-old married woman who destroys over $100,000 worth of private property is not a little girl making a mistake," I corrected him evenly, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "She is a massive liability." Before my father could formulate a pathetic excuse to defend her, my mother whipped around to face me. The stark fear in her eyes was rapidly being swallowed by the defensive, venomous rage she always reserved exclusively for me. "Keep your voice down," Brenda hissed, marching across the porch and grabbing my upper arm. Her sharp acrylic nails dug painfully into my skin, but I did not pull away. I just looked down at her hand, and then up into her desperate, angry face. "This is not the time for your arrogant, snarky comments, Simone," she spat, her voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper. "Look at this massive mess out here. Look at what is happening to our family reputation. You always do this. You always stand around judging us from your high horse when you have absolutely no idea how the real world actually works. You sit in your little gray cubicle all day long, pushing meaningless papers and stamping boring forms for some faceless corporate office. You do not know what real pressure feels like. You do not know what it takes to protect a family from ruin." It was almost comical how entirely predictable she was. Even in the face of absolute disaster, while police lights flashed across her face, her very first instinct was to tear me down and assert her dominance. For my entire adult life, my mother had deliberately minimized my career and my intelligence. When I bought my own home, she told everyone it was just beginner luck in the market. When I got promoted to senior investigator, she told her wealthy church friends I was just a simple data entry clerk who got a tiny cost of living raise. She desperately needed me to be insignificant so she could fiercely maintain the grand illusion that Chloe, with her flashy but fraudulent husband and her superficial lifestyle, was the true success story of the family. You are entirely right, Mom, I said smoothly, keeping my facial expression perfectly blank and unbothered. I just push papers all day, so please enlighten me. Tell me exactly how your superior knowledge of the real world is going to magically fix a totaled SUV, a completely destroyed property line, and a smashed luxury vehicle belonging to a retired lawyer who can sue this family into bankruptcy by tomorrow morning. Brenda's face contorted with pure fury. Do not play smart with me right now, she growled, her chest heaving as she breathed heavily through her nose. We are going to fix this. We are going to handle this quietly and keep it out of the courts. Chloe absolutely cannot have this on her driving record. Trent is already furious with her over money issues. If he finds out she went to a club, got drunk, and wrecked a vehicle, he will cut off all her credit cards immediately. He will file for divorce and leave her with nothing. She will lose her entire lifestyle. And whose fault is that, I asked, tilting my head slightly. It is nobody's fault, Brenda snapped, completely detaching herself from any logical reality. It was a very dark road. She was highly upset and not thinking clearly. Anyone could have made that simple mistake. But you are going to help us fix this right now. You owe us that much for being so incredibly difficult and stubborn your entire life. You are going to do exactly what I tell you to do, and you are going to keep your mouth shut while doing it. I looked past her shaking shoulder. Two police officers were systematically walking around the perimeter of the crash site. One of them was taking dozens of photographs of the damaged fence and the crumpled bumper with a digital camera documenting the lack of brake marks on the grass. The other officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern, no-nonsense expression, was holding a heavy metal clipboard. He was running a bright flashlight over the dashboard of the crashed SUV, searching through the cracked glass for the vehicle identification number. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. I had read thousands of police reports just like the one he was about to draft. I knew the exact sequence of questions he was required to ask by law. My mother was still talking, her voice a frantic buzzing noise that I simply tuned out. You are going to go down there and talk to them, she ordered, her grip tightening painfully on my arm once again. You are the one with the completely clean record. You have never even had a minor speeding ticket in your life. You are going to handle the police officers. You are going to tell them it was just a silly accident. You are going to use your calm professional voice and make them go away before they try to arrest someone. I gently but firmly peeled her trembling fingers off my arm. I took a deliberate step back, creating a clear physical boundary between us on the porch. I will speak to the police, I said calmly, looking her dead in the eye. But I will only tell them the exact truth. Brenda's eyes widened in shock and she took a sudden aggressive step toward me, her hand raised slightly as if she was actually going to strike me right there in front of the flashing lights. Before she could do anything foolish, the loud crunch of heavy boots on the gravel driveway interrupted her. Excuse me, folks, a deep, commanding voice called out through the crisp morning air. We all turned our heads simultaneously. The tall police officer was walking up our concrete driveway, stepping carefully over the scattered pieces of broken wood and plastic debris. He stopped at the very bottom of the porch steps, his expression completely unreadable behind his dark aviator sunglasses. He flipped open the cover of his heavy metal clipboard and clicked his silver pen. Good morning. I am Officer Davis with the Atlanta Police Department, he said, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of the law. I need to speak to the registered owner of the vehicle that caused this massive collision. Can someone please tell me who owns that crushed Range Rover currently sitting on the lawn? The morning air went completely still. Not a single bird was chirping in the trees. The distant, comforting hum of highway traffic seemed to vanish entirely. My father squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a soft, pathetic whimper of defeat. My mother completely froze in place. Slowly, deliberately, Brenda snapped her head toward me. Her eyes were wide, manic, and filled with a dark, suffocating threat. It was the exact same look she used to give me when I was a helpless child. The look that meant I was about to be severely punished for something Chloe had done wrong. She stared directly into my eyes, her jaw clenched so tight I could actually see the muscle ticking rapidly in her cheek. Without saying a single word out loud, her message was crystal clear to everyone standing on that porch. She was fiercely commanding me to step forward. She was commanding me to sacrifice myself and take the fall for her precious golden child. Brenda's grip on my arm was like a steel vise. She yanked me backward with a sudden aggressive force, pulling me away from the open doorway just before Officer Davis could reach the bottom of the porch steps. "Give us 1 minute." "Officer," my mother called out, her voice instantly transforming into a sickeningly sweet tone of fake Southern hospitality. Before he could respond, she slammed the heavy mahogany door shut instantly, cutting off the frantic spinning of the red and blue police lights and plunging the foyer into a tense silence. She did not let go of my arm. She dragged me across the polished hardwood floors of the hallway and shoved me violently into the gourmet kitchen. The massive room with its pristine white marble countertops, gleaming stainless steel appliances, and perfectly arranged floral centerpieces felt completely absurd in the middle of this chaos. It felt like a sterile interrogation room hiding behind a facade of suburban perfection. Brenda cornered me against the massive kitchen island, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. "Listen to me very carefully, Simone." She began, her voice a low, frantic hiss. "You are going to walk out there right now and tell that police officer that you were the one behind the wheel last night." I stared at her, my face completely impassive. "You want me to lie to a police officer about a major traffic collision?" I stated plainly, removing all emotion from my voice. "It is not a lie, it is a family favor," Brenda snapped, waving her hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "Chloe absolutely cannot take this hit. Her marriage is hanging by a thread. Trent thinks she was at a late-night church retreat with the women ministry. If he finds out she was actually at a downtown club drinking and partying until 1 in the morning, and then destroyed a luxury vehicle, he will pack his bags today. He will file for divorce. Do you understand what that means for her? He has the money. He has the social connections. Chloe will be left with absolutely nothing. She will be ruined." I almost laughed out loud at the bitter irony of her words. As a fraud investigator, I ran deep background checks for a living. I knew for a documented fact that Trent was drowning in massive startup debt and terrible credit ratings. But my mother was too blinded by his tech bro persona and his skin color to look at his actual financial reality. She thought he was a billionaire in the making, and she was willing to sacrifice her own flesh and blood to keep him in the family. "You have to do this for her," Brenda insisted, taking a step closer and poking a rigid acrylic fingernail hard into my shoulder. "You are single. You do not have a husband to answer to. You do not have children to set an example for. Your reputation is not on the line here like hers is. You just work in a quiet cubicle somewhere. A little reckless driving ticket or a minor property damage charge will not ruin your boring corporate life. They are not going to fire a paper pusher over a traffic incident. I will even pay the fine for you. I will write you a personal check today. Just go out there, cry a little bit, and take the blame." The swinging doors of the kitchen pushed open, and my father Derek walked in. He looked completely exhausted, his shoulders slumped, as if the immense weight of his own lifelong cowardice was finally crushing him. I looked directly at him, offering him one final desperate chance to be a real parent. "Dad," I said softly, "are you seriously going to stand there and let her demand that I commit a crime?" My father would not even meet my eyes. He stared intently at the expensive tile floor and nervously wrung his hands together. "It is the only way to protect your sister Simone." He mumbled, his voice weak and pathetic. "We have to keep the peace in this house. The police just want to write a simple ticket and close their file so they can go get coffee. It is really not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. Please just do this for the family. We will cover all the financial expenses. We will make it up to you, I promise. It is not a big deal." Those words echoed loudly in my head. As a senior investigator handling federal cases, I knew exactly what a massive deal it was. lying to a uniformed police officer to intentionally alter the liable party in a major collision involving over $200,000 in property damage is perjury. Filing an insurance claim based on that lie is felony insurance fraud. They were literally asking me to risk federal prison time, the loss of my professional license, and the total destruction of my career, all to save my spoiled sister from a well-deserved divorce. They were so utterly consumed by their own privilege and arrogance that they genuinely believed the law simply did not apply to them. They thought they could just buy their way out of a police report. Brenda grabbed my face with both hands, her long nails digging into my cheeks, forcing me to look directly into her manic eyes. "Do you hear me, Simone?" she hissed, dropping all pretense of asking and moving straight to commanding. "You owe us. We raised you. We put a roof over your head and paid for your education. You will walk out there right now and tell that man you took the car you lost control in the dark and you crashed it. You will apologize to Mr. Henderson, and you will absolutely not mention your sister." I reached up and slowly, deliberately peeled her trembling hands off my face. I turned my head away from her toxic glare and looked out the large bay window positioned directly above the kitchen sink. Outside, the pale morning sun was just starting to rise, illuminating the massive wreckage scattered across the frosted lawn. I could see Officer Davis standing by his patrol cruiser, talking intently into his shoulder-mounted radio. He was looking down the street, likely calling for a heavy-duty municipal tow truck to clear the scene. The physical evidence was being locked down. The official record was about to be created. The trap was perfectly set, and my parents were practically begging me to let them jump right into it. I turned back to look at my mother, whose face was twisted in an ugly, demanding panic, and my father, who was still staring uselessly at his own shoes. All the lingering guilt I had ever felt about not being a good enough daughter completely evaporated in that exact second. My heart slowed to a steady, calm rhythm. My voice was ice cold, completely devoid of any hesitation, fear, or familial loyalty. "All right," I said smoothly, giving them both a small, calculating nod. "I will go talk to the cops." Before I could even reach for the door handle, the screech of tires echoed down the street. A black sedan swerved violently to the curb, parking half on the grass. The driver's side door flew open and Trent stepped out. My brother-in-law was wearing designer sweatpants and a tight crewneck shirt that barely contained his agitated energy. He slammed the car door so hard the windows rattled. Trent always moved with the unearned confidence of a mediocre white man who believed his mere presence was a gift to our black family. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on, confusing his arrogant tech bro persona for actual success. He stormed up the driveway, completely ignoring the police officers, and marched straight onto the porch. My mother immediately shrank back, her domineering attitude vanishing the second the man she desperately wanted to impress arrived. Trent did not even look at the crushed SUV. He walked right up to me, invading my personal space, his face flushed with anger. He pointed a finger directly at my chest and told me I was a complete disaster. He said he had to leave his distressed wife crying in bed because of my careless, destructive behavior. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice so the cops would not hear, but making sure my parents caught every single word. He called me a pathetic embarrassment to the family. He said I was exactly the kind of stereotype his wealthy investors warned him about, an irresponsible, ungrateful woman who could not even handle a simple vehicle without destroying a neighborhood. The racial undertones of his insults were not subtle. They were sharp, deliberate, and designed to put me in my place. I glanced over his shoulder at my parents. My father was staring at the ground, pretending he did not hear a white man disrespecting his eldest daughter on his own front porch. My mother was nodding slightly, her eyes silently begging Trent not to be angry with them. They were entirely willing to let this man degrade me, strip away my dignity, and hurl racist microaggressions at me, all to protect the illusion of Chloe's perfect marriage. I looked back at Trent. I noticed the faint smell of stale alcohol on his breath. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands. This was not just a man angry about a car crash. This was a man drowning in secret financial ruin, desperate to maintain control. I knew his crypto startup was under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I knew he was days away from bankruptcy. He needed this narrative to be true, because if he had to pay for this accident, he would lose everything. I did not argue with him. I did not defend my honor or scream at my parents for their cowardly silence. I just gave Trent a slow, empty smile that made his jaw clench in confusion. Then I smoothly stepped around him and walked down the porch stairs toward the flashing lights. Officer Davis looked up from his heavy metal clipboard as I approached. He asked if I was the owner of the vehicle. I stood up straight, folding my hands neatly in front of me, and looked him dead in the eye. I told him I was the one driving the car last night. I kept my voice steady, professional, and completely convincing. I explained that I had gone out for a late drive to clear my head, took the corner too fast in the dark, panicked, and hit the wrong pedal. I told him I was incredibly disoriented after the airbags deployed and went inside to sit down because I was in shock. Behind me, I could hear the sharp exhale of relief from my mother. I could practically feel Trent smirking in the shadows of the porch, fully believing he had successfully intimidated me into submission. Officer Davis listened intently, his pen flying across the official incident report form. He asked me several standard questions about my speed, the lighting conditions, and whether I had consumed any alcohol. I answered each one with the flawless precision of an expert who had read thousands of these exact reports. I was giving him a textbook confession, hitting every required legal marker to establish total, undeniable fault. He asked for my driver license and insurance information. I handed him my perfectly clean license. After a few tense minutes, Officer Davis ripped the top copy of the carbon paper from his clipboard and handed it to me along with his silver pen. He told me to review the statement and sign at the bottom line to confirm that everything I had just reported was the absolute truth under penalty of law. I held the heavy metal clipboard. I stared at the solid black line at the bottom of the page. This was the point of no return. Up until this exact second, my mother stealing my keys and Chloe crashing the car was just a terrible family secret. But the moment the ink from this pen touched this official police document, the entire situation fundamentally changed. It escalated from a domestic dispute into a documented federal crime. By forcing me to lie to a uniformed officer, my family had just orchestrated perjury. And by planning to use this police report to file a fraudulent insurance claim to fix the damages, they were stepping blindly into a felony conspiracy. I did not hesitate. I pressed the silver pen to the paper and signed my full name in perfectly legible cursive. I handed the clipboard back to Officer Davis and thanked him for his time. As I turned around and walked back up the driveway toward my smiling, relieved family, they had absolutely no idea that I had not just signed a traffic ticket. I had just signed their arrest warrants. The trap was officially closed. The heavy rumble of the municipal tow truck engine eventually faded down the street, taking the crushed remains of my mother, uninsured SUV, and the severely damaged Tesla with it. Officer Davis and his partner packed up their equipment, got into their cruiser, and drove away without looking back. The flashing red and blue lights that had painted our lawn for the last hour finally vanished, leaving behind nothing but the harsh, cold reality of the morning sun and a yard covered in jagged debris. The second the police cruiser turned the corner and disappeared from view, the atmosphere on the porch shifted instantly. The tense, respectful silence my family had maintained for the cops evaporated. Trent dropped his fake posture of the concerned, grieving husband. He ran a hand through his messy hair, let out a sharp sigh, and turned to my parents. His eyes were no longer filled with righteous anger. They were cold, calculating, and laser-focused on an opportunity. "Get inside," Trent ordered, pointing a finger at my mother. His tone was not that of a son-in-law speaking to an elder. It was the tone of a master commanding his subordinates. "We need to talk about logistics right now before that idiot girl upstairs wakes up and ruins everything." My mother, who had spent my entire life demanding absolute respect and obedience from everyone around her, simply nodded and scurried through the front door like a frightened mouse. My father followed closely behind her, his head hung low. I walked in last, my face a mask of complete indifference. Trent gestured toward the formal dining room, a space my mother only used to entertain her wealthy church friends. "You two in there," he commanded. "Simone, go to your room and stay out of the way. You have done enough damage for one day. Just keep your mouth shut until we tell you what the next steps are." I did not argue. I gave him a blank stare, turned around, and began walking up the grand, sweeping staircase. I made sure to step heavily on the wooden treads, letting the sound of my footsteps echo through the foyer, so they would believe I was retreating to my bedroom in shame. I reached the top of the stairs, opened the door to the guest room, and slammed it shut loudly. Then I stood perfectly still. I slipped off my leather slides, leaving them by the door. In my bare feet, I quietly opened the bedroom door again and crept back out into the hallway. The thick plush carpeting of the second-floor landing completely muffled my movements. I glided over to the wooden banister and crouched down in the shadows, perfectly positioned just above the entrance to the formal dining room. From this vantage point, I had a clear line of sight to the massive mahogany dining table, but the heavy chandelier completely obscured me from their view. I reached into the pocket of my sweatpants, pulled out my smartphone, and opened the voice recording application. I pressed the red button, placed the phone gently on the carpet near the edge of the stairs, and listened. Down in the dining room, Trent was pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug. My parents were sitting rigidly at the table, looking at him like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "Let us drop the act," Brenda Trent said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We all know Simone did not crash that car. I know Chloe was out at a club. I know she was driving. And I know she was likely completely intoxicated. If I had let those cops breathalyze her, she would be leaving in handcuffs right now, and her face would be on the evening news." My mother gasped softly. "Trent, please, you have to understand," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "She was just stressed. You two have been arguing so much lately. She just needed to blow off some steam. Please do not leave her over this. It would break her heart." "It is not about her heart, Brenda," Trent snapped, slamming his hand down on the mahogany table. "It is about my reputation and my money. Do you have any idea how bad this makes me look? I am trying to secure Series B funding for my tech company next week. I am dealing with high-level investors. I cannot have a wife who is catching felony DUI charges and destroying neighborhoods in the middle of the night. It makes me look unstable. It makes me look like a liability." I listened intently, my professional instincts sharpening with every word he spoke. Trent was lying. His tech company was a complete sham, a glorified cryptocurrency scam that was currently hemorrhaging money. He was not securing Series B funding. He was desperately trying to avoid bankruptcy. And he was about to use this exact situation to bail himself out. "I am seriously considering filing for divorce on Monday morning," Trent continued, letting the threat hang heavy in the air. "I will take the house. I will take the accounts. Chloe will be back living in her childhood bedroom with absolutely nothing to her name. And I will make sure everyone at your precious country club and your massive church knows exactly why I left her." My father finally spoke up, his voice cracking. "Trent's son, please do not do that. We are family. We can fix this. We just need to know what you want. Tell us what we need to do to make this right." Trent stopped pacing. He leaned over the table, planting his hands firmly on the polished wood, and smiled a cold, predatory smile. "I'm glad you asked, Derek. Because there is a very simple solution to all of this. It all comes down to Simone." He paused, letting the silence build the tension. Simone just signed a legally binding police report, taking full responsibility for destroying a brand new $150,000 luxury SUV. The car is a total loss. There is no repairing that frame. Her insurance company is going to have to cut a check for the full replacement value of the vehicle. I held my breath on the stairs, my eyes narrowing. He was stepping right into the territory of a federal crime, and he was too arrogant to even realize it. "So what?" Brenda asked, her voice laced with confusion. "That money is just going to go toward buying a replacement car. It does not fix your situation with Chloe." Trent laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You are not thinking big enough, Brenda. Simone does not need a $150,000 car. She is a single woman with a boring corporate job. She can drive a used Honda for all I care. You are going to force her to file that insurance claim today. When the company sends her the settlement check, she is going to cash it. And then she is going to wire $100,000 directly into my business account. The dining room fell dead silent. Even my mother, who was capable of extreme manipulation, seemed genuinely shocked by the sheer audacity of his demand. $100,000, my father repeated weakly. Trent, that is extortion. That is her insurance money. We cannot force her to just hand over 100 grand to you. Trent stood up straight, his face turning red with sudden rage. You will do exactly what I tell you to do, Derek, he spat, dropping any remaining pretense of respect. You will force her to do it, because if you do not, I will walk out that door right now. Call Officer Davis and tell him my wife was actually the one driving. I will tell them you all conspired to lie on a federal document. You will all go to jail for perjury, and I will walk away clean as the whistle-blowing husband. He pointed a finger directly at my mother. You are her mother, Brenda. You have been manipulating that girl since she was in kindergarten. Do not tell me you cannot break her down now. You tell her she owes this family. You tell her that her sister life is on the line. You guilt trip her, you threaten her. You do whatever you have to do to make her sign that money over to me. Consider it an emotional distress fee for the trauma your daughter has put me through. If I see that $100,000 in my account by next week, Chloe and I will go to marriage counseling and pretend this never happened. If I do not get the money, I am destroying this entire family. My mother let out a long, shaky breath. She did not defend me. She did not kick this arrogant, blackmailing man out of her house. Instead, she chose the path she always chose. She chose to sacrifice me to maintain her social standing. Okay, Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible. Okay, Trent. We will get you the money. I will make Simone file the claim today. She will do what I say. She always does. Excellent, Trent said, his tone instantly returning to a smooth, businesslike cadence. Have her draft an agreement. I want it in writing that she is voluntarily gifting the funds to my company. We need to make sure the IRS does not flag it as a suspicious transfer. Get it done before Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. I want to celebrate properly. On the dark carpeted landing above them, I slowly reached out and tapped the red square on my phone screen. The timer stopped at exactly 6 minutes and 42 seconds. The audio file automatically saved to my secure cloud drive backed up instantly to the servers at the National Insurance Fraud Investigation Bureau. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen. My heart was not broken by my parents' betrayal. It was not shattered by my mother-willing agreement to extort me. Instead, a deep, profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who were utterly determined to misunderstand me. But now I did not have to prove anything at all. Trent thought he was a criminal mastermind, leveraging a family secret for an easy payday. My mother thought she could bully me into bankrolling her golden child disastrous marriage. They thought they had trapped a weak, compliant paper pusher in a desperate corner. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed a senior fraud investigator a pristine, crystal-clear audio recording of extortion, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The trap was no longer just a speeding ticket or a crashed car. It was a massive federal criminal case, and they had just locked themselves inside it. I stood up in the shadows, slipped my phone back into my pocket, and smiled. I could not wait for Thanksgiving dinner. I walked silently back to the guest bedroom, my bare feet sinking into the thick carpet, and closed the door behind me. I turned the brass lock until it clicked into place, sealing myself off from the toxic environment radiating from the first floor. The morning sun was now pouring through the large windows, casting long, bright shadows across the meticulously decorated room. I walked over to the corner where my sleek, hard-shell suitcase was resting on a luggage rack. I unzipped the main compartment, bypassed the neatly folded clothes, and pressed my fingers against a hidden seam in the lining. The false bottom peeled back, revealing a heavy matte black briefcase. It was a military-grade encrypted mobile workstation, the kind issued exclusively to top-tier federal contractors and senior corporate investigators. I carried the heavy laptop to the small mahogany writing desk by the window and set it down. I opened the lid and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner embedded in the power button. The machine hummed to life instantly. The screen remained pitch black for a few seconds before a crisp, high-definition logo faded into view. It was the official seal of the National Insurance Fraud Investigation Bureau, intertwined with the emblem of the largest automotive insurance conglomerate in the United States. I sat down in the velvet chair and stared at the glowing screen, allowing myself a rare moment to appreciate the profound irony of my life. For over a decade, my mother had told everyone in our affluent suburban social circle that I was just a low-level data entry clerk. She told her wealthy church friends that I sat in a gray cubicle, mindlessly stamping forms and answering customer service calls. She needed to diminish me so she could elevate my sister Chloe, who was doing nothing with her life but spending Trent's imaginary tech money. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. I am a senior director of fraud investigation. I command a specialized unit of former detectives, forensic accountants, and cybersecurity experts. My daily job is to dismantle multi-million-dollar organized crime rings that stage accidents, commit arson, and extort insurance companies. I track offshore bank accounts, I subpoena phone records, and I testify as an expert witness in federal court. I am the person the executives call when a claim smells like a scam. I literally put people in federal prison for a living. And now my own family, a group of arrogant, financially illiterate amateurs, thought they could force me to participate in a clumsy, transparent extortion plot. I cracked my knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and rested my hands on the keyboard. It was time to go to work. I logged into the secure federal portal using my two-factor authentication credentials. The dashboard populated with high-priority case files, but I ignored them all. I navigated to the top right corner of the screen and clicked the button to open a brand new, highly classified internal investigation. A blank digital dossier appeared on the screen, waiting to be filled with the names of the guilty. In the primary suspect field, I typed the name Brenda Washington. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second. This was my mother. The woman who had birthed me, raised me, and systematically tried to break my spirit for 35 years. Filing this official document meant there was no turning back. If I submitted this to the national database, she would face an aggressive investigation that could end in a criminal indictment. I thought about the way she had grabbed my arm on the porch. I thought about the way she willingly agreed to let Trent extort me for $100,000 just to save her own social standing. My hesitation vanished entirely. I hit the enter key, locking her name into the federal system. In the secondary suspect field, I typed Trent Vance. I added his home address, his phone number, and the corporate tax identification number for his failing cryptocurrency startup. I made sure to flag his profile for potential financial distress, noting that his motive was tied to an imminent bankruptcy. Under the co-conspirator section, I added Chloe Vance. Finally, in the witness section, I typed the name Derek Washington, noting his presence during the extortion attempt, but classifying him as a passive observer rather than an active mastermind. Next, I moved to the evidence upload section. I connected my smartphone to the laptop using an encrypted cable. I transferred the 6-minute and 42-second audio file I had just recorded on the staircase. I labeled the file as Exhibit A, audio evidence of premeditated extortion, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I typed out a detailed summary of the recording, highlighting the exact timestamp where Trent explicitly demanded a $100,000 wire transfer from my future insurance settlement. I also detailed my mother's verbal agreement to coerce me into filing the fraudulent claim. The case file was building beautifully. It was a pristine, open and shut conspiracy charge. But to make the insurance fraud charges stick, I needed to attach the specific vehicle and the police report to the dossier. I navigated to the Department of Motor Vehicles database integrated into my portal. Since I knew the exact license plate number of my mother's older SUV, I typed it into the search bar. I needed to pull the vehicle identification number and attach her current insurance policy to the case to show exactly how much money they were attempting to defraud from the company. I pressed search and leaned back in my chair, taking a sip from a bottle of water I had left on the desk. The system processed the request, cross-referencing the license plate with the National Insurance Registry. Usually this takes less than 2 seconds, returning a green screen with all the active coverage details, liability limits, and the assigned agent. But the screen did not turn green. Instead, the entire border of the portal flashed a stark, blinding red. A loud, sharp warning chime echoed from the laptop speakers. A large notification box popped up in the center of the screen, outlined in bold warning colors. I sat forward, my brow furrowing in confusion. I set my water bottle down and squinted at the text on the screen. As a senior investigator, I rarely saw this specific alert, unless a vehicle was involved in active criminal enterprise or severe financial delinquency. I read the detailed text generated by the national database, and my jaw slowly dropped. The vehicle inquiry showed that the older model Range Rover, currently smashed into a tree on our front lawn, was not insured. It was not just underinsured. The policy had been completely terminated. According to the database logs, the insurance provider had sent multiple warning letters regarding missed premium payments over the last 6 months. Exactly 32 days ago, the company had officially canceled the policy for non-payment. I read the screen again, making absolutely sure I was not making a clerical error. But the data was undeniable. My mother, the woman who paraded around her country club, acting like she was a part of the wealthy elite, had been driving an uninsured luxury vehicle for over a month because she was completely broke. A cold, genuine laugh escaped my lips, filling the quiet bedroom. The sheer absurdity of the situation was almost too perfectly poetic. Trent was downstairs right now, aggressively pacing the dining room floor, threatening to destroy the family if he did not get a $100,000 cut from the insurance payout. My mother was downstairs right now, desperately planning how to manipulate me into filing a claim to fix her precious car and save her golden child from divorce. They were willing to commit federal perjury, wire fraud, and extortion, all built on the absolute certainty that an insurance company was going to write a massive check for the damages. They had meticulously planned a high-stakes bank robbery, completely unaware that the bank vault was already empty. Because the car that Chloe crashed was not my fully insured brand-new vehicle, it was my mother's older vehicle. And because my mother had defaulted on her payments, there was absolutely zero collision coverage, zero liability coverage, and zero property damage coverage. This meant my mother was personally, legally, and financially responsible for every single penny of the destruction sitting out on that lawn. She would have to pay out of pocket to tow her totaled car. She would have to pay out of pocket to rebuild the expensive wooden fence. And worst of all, she was personally liable for completely replacing Mr. Henderson's custom-ordered $100,000 Tesla. The massive financial ruin Trent was trying to avoid by extorting me was actually going to crash directly onto my mother's head by the end of the week. I looked back at the screen, staring at the bright red warning banner. I slowly dragged my mouse over to the audio file I had uploaded and hit save. I did not need to confront them right now. I did not need to run downstairs and scream about the lapsed policy. My job was not to prevent them from committing fraud. My job was to let them dig the hole as deep as they possibly could before I threw the dirt in. I closed the laptop, feeling a surge of adrenaline, and prepared to go to the hospital to watch my sister put on the performance of a lifetime. The drive to the hospital was suffocating. My father drove his luxury sedan in complete silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned pale. My mother sat in the passenger seat, furiously typing on her smartphone. She was already doing damage control, sending carefully crafted text messages to the women in her church circle. She was spinning a tragic, elegant narrative about Chloe suffering from severe exhaustion and a sudden medical emergency, completely omitting the part where her golden child destroyed a residential block in the middle of the night. I sat alone in the spacious back seat, watching the upscale Atlanta neighborhoods roll by through the tinted window. I felt remarkably calm. My mind was sharp, neatly categorizing the audio evidence and the lapsed insurance policy I had just secured in my federal database. We arrived at the prestigious Atlanta Medical Center and took the private elevator up to the VIP recovery wing. My mother had specifically demanded a private suite for Chloe, ensuring she would not have to mingle with the regular emergency room patients. When we walked through the heavy wooden door of the hospital room, the scene before me was almost comical. Chloe was propped up against a mountain of crisp white hospital pillows. She was wearing a thick, rigid medical collar around her neck, her blonde, highlighted hair perfectly arranged to cascade over the plastic edges. The lights in the room were dimmed to a soft, dramatic glow. A massive basket of expensive artisanal pastries and a tray of gourmet iced coffees rested on the rolling table next to her bed, no doubt ordered by my mother the second we left the house. Chloe was casually scrolling through social media on her phone, but the moment she heard our footsteps, she quickly dropped the device onto her lap and let out a pathetic, trembling whimper. "Oh, my sweet baby." My mother gasped, rushing across the room and throwing her arms delicately around Chloe. She kissed her forehead and smoothed her hair, acting as if Chloe had just returned from a war zone rather than a drunken joyride. "I was so worried about you. Are you in terrible pain?" Chloe squeezed her eyes shut and forced out a single tear. "It hurts so much, Mom," she whispered, her voice fragile and shaking. "My neck is incredibly stiff and my head is pounding." It was the most terrifying experience of my entire life. Trent was standing by the large window overlooking the city skyline. He had his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw set in a hard line. He did not look like a concerned husband. He looked like a man aggressively guarding an investment. When I walked into the room, his eyes immediately locked onto me. He gave me a sharp, threatening glare, a silent demand to remember the extortion deal we had struck in the dining room. He wanted his $100,000, and he wanted me to play my part flawlessly. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. I walked over to the side of the hospital bed, projecting the ultimate image of a naive, compliant, and deeply concerned older sister. I softened my posture, letting my shoulders slump slightly, and looked at Chloe with wide, sympathetic eyes. "I am so incredibly glad you are safe, Chloe," I said softly, reaching out to gently pat her blanket. "The police were at the house for a long time this morning. It was a massive mess. But Trent explained everything to me. I know what I have to do. I am going to file the insurance claim exactly like he asked, so we can get him the money to make up for all this emotional distress. I just want to make sure I have the story perfectly straight for the insurance adjusters. They can be so tricky with their questions." At the mention of the money, Trent relaxed his posture slightly. A smug, satisfied smirk crept onto his face. He actually believed he had broken me. My mother beamed at me, clearly thrilled that I had finally accepted my role as the family sacrifice without a fight. And Chloe, completely unaware of the federal trap closing around her, eagerly sat up a little straighter, ready to spin her web of lies. "Of course," Simone Chloe said, her voice suddenly sounding much stronger. "What do you need to know? I will tell you exactly what happened so you can fill out the paperwork today." I pulled a small notepad and a pen from my purse, acting like a diligent secretary taking dictation. It must have been so dark and scary out there. I began, keeping my voice gentle and encouraging. "The police asked me if you tried to stop the car before the crash. Did you slam on the brakes when you realized you were losing control?" Chloe nodded enthusiastically, wincing slightly to remind us of her fake neck injury. "Yes, absolutely." I stomped on the brake pedal as hard as I possibly could with both feet. I stood on those brakes, Simone. But the road must have been slick, or the car malfunctioned because it just kept sliding forward no matter what I did. I nodded slowly, writing her exact words down on my notepad. Inside my head, my analytical brain was smiling. The police photographs and my own visual inspection of the lawn proved there was absolutely zero braking evidence. Not a single skid mark on the pavement, not a single tear in the grass leading up to the fence. The vehicle had accelerated into the crash, not decelerated. Lie number one was documented. That is terrible, I murmured sympathetically. And where exactly were you coming from when you turned onto our street? The police wanted to know your trajectory. Were you coming straight down Elm Street from the highway interchange? Chloe did not even hesitate. Yes, I was coming straight from the highway. I was driving so carefully, but this massive deer just jumped right out of the bushes on the left side of the road. It scared me to death. I had to yank the steering wheel violently to the right to avoid hitting the poor animal. And that is how I ended up jumping the curb and hitting the fence. I kept my head down, pretending to write furiously, so they would not see the cold satisfaction in my eyes. Lie number two was an absolute masterpiece of stupidity. Elm Street was a dead end that did not connect to the highway at all. Furthermore, the damage to my mother SUV showed a direct head-on impact. The steering column had been locked in a perfectly straight position when the car hit the Tesla. There was no evasive maneuver. There was no hard right turn. She had simply driven straight off the road. Trent stepped away from the window, waving his hand impatiently. All right, that is enough interrogation, Simone. You have the basic story. Animal in the road, faulty brakes, unavoidable accident. Just put that in your little report and submit it online. Do not overcomplicate this. We need that settlement check processed by next week, and I do not want your corporate incompetence slowing it down. I closed my notepad and slipped it back into my purse. You are absolutely right, Trent, I said smoothly. I have everything I need to proceed with the claim. Just as I spoke those words, the heavy door to the hospital room swung open. A tall man wearing a crisp white lab coat over a tailored suit walked in carrying a digital medical tablet. He had silver hair and a completely no-nonsense demeanor. The gold name badge pinned to his lapel read, Dr. Aris, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Good morning, the doctor said, his voice deep and authoritative, commanding immediate silence in the room. He walked straight to the foot of Chloe's bed and tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up her medical charts. My mother instantly puffed up her chest, preparing to demand the best possible treatment for her daughter. Doctor, thank goodness you are here, Brenda gushed, stepping forward. My daughter has been in agonizing pain all morning. Her neck is incredibly stiff from the whiplash, and we need to discuss a long-term physical therapy plan. I want the absolute best specialists for her recovery. Dr. Aris did not look up from his screen. Actually, Mrs. Washington, that will not be necessary, he said flatly. I have reviewed the comprehensive X-rays, the MRI scans, and the blood work we ordered when she was admitted. Structurally, her cervical spine is in perfect condition. There is absolutely no evidence of whiplash, microfractures, or even mild ligament strain. She can remove that cervical collar immediately. It is serving no medical purpose. Chloe's face flushed a deep, embarrassing shade of pink. She reached up hesitantly and unfastened the Velcro straps of the thick brace, pulling it away from her neck. Trent glared at her, clearly annoyed that she was not a convincing enough victim to justify a massive medical payout. However, the doctor continued, finally looking up from his tablet and directing his piercing gaze right at Chloe. There is something in your physical examination that is highly unusual given the narrative of the accident provided to the paramedics. The air in the room suddenly grew thick. My father stopped staring at the floor and looked up. Trent shifted his weight uncomfortably. I stood perfectly still, watching the doctor dissect their carefully constructed lie with clinical precision. Usually in a high-speed head-on collision where the driver's side airbag deploys, we see a very specific pattern of injury. Dr. Aris explained, his voice echoing in the quiet room. We typically see significant blunt force trauma to the sternum, severe friction burns on the inner forearms from the explosive chemical deployment of the airbag, and often facial abrasions. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at Chloe. Pristine, unmarked face, and her perfectly manicured hands resting on the blanket. You have absolutely none of those injuries. In fact, your chest and face are completely untouched, which suggests you were not leaning forward or bracing yourself against the steering wheel when the impact occurred. Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward Trent. I I have always had very fast reflexes, she stammered, her voice losing all its previous confidence. I must have thrown my hands up to protect my face at the last second. Dr. Aris did not look convinced. He tapped his tablet again, bringing up a high-resolution photograph of a medical scan. Perhaps. But that does not explain the other injuries we found during your physical assessment. What other injuries? Trent demanded, stepping forward aggressively, his voice tight with sudden anxiety. She said she was fine other than her neck. The doctor turned his tablet around so everyone in the room could see the screen. It was a close-up photograph of Chloe's upper right arm just below her shoulder. Against her light skin, a cluster of deep dark purple and yellow bruises stood out starkly. The X-rays showed deep tissue contusions on your right bicep. Dr. Aris stated, his tone dropping into a serious investigative register. This bruising pattern is incredibly distinct. It was not caused by a seatbelt, and it was certainly not caused by hitting a dashboard or a steering wheel. The doctor stepped closer to the bed, pointing a steady finger at the photograph. These are concentrated pressure points. It looks exactly like the finger marks of an adult human hand gripping your arm with extreme violent force. Given the state of the tissue damage, these bruises were inflicted right before the collision occurred. Dr. Aris lowered the tablet and looked directly into Chloe's terrified eyes. So my question for you is this. If you were alone in that car driving down a dark road, who grabbed you right before you crashed? Trent had panicked the moment Dr. Aris pointed out the bruise on Chloe's arm. He had aggressively stepped forward in the hospital room, raising his voice and claiming he had grabbed his wife to stop her from getting behind the wheel because she was highly emotional. He spun a quick, desperate lie about being a concerned husband trying to prevent a tragedy, taking advantage of the fact that the doctor was too busy saving actual lives to interrogate a domestic dispute further. The doctor had simply updated the medical chart with Trent's statement and discharged Chloe, leaving us to return home and prepare for my mother's grand Thanksgiving dinner. By 5 in the evening, the atmosphere inside our sprawling brick house was completely divorced from the reality of the crushed vehicles still sitting on the front lawn. My mother had invited several high-ranking members of her mega church, including Deacon Hayes and his wife, to celebrate the holiday. To cover up the massive, embarrassing wreckage outside, Brenda had shamelessly lied to her guests the moment they walked through the door. She stood in the foyer wearing a stunning silk dress and told them a tragic tale about a reckless drunk driver who had swerved off the road in the middle of the night, destroying her beautiful car and the neighbor's property before fleeing the scene on foot. She clasped her hands together and praised the Lord for protecting her home, soaking in the sympathetic gasps and prayers from her wealthy church friends. I spent the entire evening relegated to the kitchen and the dining room periphery, functioning less like a daughter and more like the hired help. While my parents and Trent sat at the massive mahogany table laughing and drinking expensive wine, I was the one carrying the heavy ceramic dishes of roasted turkey, collard greens, and sweet potato pie. I refilled their crystal water glasses. I cleared the dirty salad plates. I did not complain, and I did not ask to be seated. I moved silently around the room, serving the very people who were actively planning to extort me for $100,000. I used the time to observe them gathering mental evidence of their complete and utter delusion. The conversation at the table inevitably turned to Chloe. She was sitting at the center of the arrangement, the rigid medical collar strapped back securely around her neck, playing the role of the traumatized victim flawlessly. Brenda leaned over and gently stroked Chloe's hand, looking at her with a sickening level of adoration. My mother began her usual deeply ingrained monologue that she had recited since we were children. She spoke to the church elders about Chloe's beauty, weaving in the toxic threads of colorism that had defined our family dynamic for decades. Chloe has always been so incredibly delicate, Brenda cooed, her voice echoing in the large room. She has that beautiful, bright complexion just like my grandmother. She has that fine hair and those soft features. She was always meant for a life of luxury and protection. That is why the Lord blessed her with a strong, successful provider like Trent to take care of her. The church ladies nodded in agreement, smiling warmly at Trent, who puffed out his chest and took a slow sip of his wine. Then Brenda turned her attention to me, as I approached the table to pour a fresh boat of gravy. The warm maternal glow vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, assessing stare. Now Simone, my mother, continued gesturing toward me with a dismissive wave of her hand. Simone takes after the other side of the family. She has those strong, broad features and that very dark skin. She was never the delicate type. Simone is built for hard labor and independence. She has to be because she is not the type of woman to attract a wealthy husband to rescue her. She just works quietly in her little cubicle, doing her data entry and pushing her papers. We are very proud that she can at least pay her own rent. The guests offered me polite, pitying smiles. They saw exactly what my mother wanted them to see. They saw an unmarried, unremarkable, dark-skinned woman who was lucky to even be allowed in the same room as her beautiful, light-skinned sister and her wealthy white brother-in-law. I poured the gravy smoothly, ensuring not a single drop spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. I looked directly at Deacon Hayes, offered a warm, empty smile, and asked if anyone required more cranberry sauce. I did not feel a single ounce of pain or rejection. Their insults meant absolutely nothing to me anymore because I knew I was holding the keys to their destruction. At the far end of the table, Trent was holding court, bragging loudly to the men about his cryptocurrency startup. He spoke confidently about securing Series B funding, changing the digital financial landscape, and meeting with international investors. He sounded exactly like a visionary billionaire. But as I walked back into the kitchen, I thought about his corporate tax identification number sitting inside my encrypted federal portal. I knew his bank accounts were heavily overdrawn. I knew his credit score was ruined. This entire Thanksgiving dinner was a masterclass in deception, a beautiful symphony of lies, and I was the only person in the house holding the actual sheet music. The evening dragged on until the guests had finally eaten their fill and finished their wine. They gathered their expensive coats in the foyer, offering endless hugs and fake promises to pray for Chloe's swift recovery from her terrible trauma. Brenda stood at the open front door, the perfect picture of Southern grace, waving and calling out blessings into the crisp autumn night as the luxury cars pulled out of our driveway. Then the heavy mahogany door clicked shut. The deadbolt turned with a loud metallic snap. The atmosphere in the house dropped 20 degrees in a single second. It was as if the air had been instantly sucked out of the room. The warm, fake smiles melted off their faces like cheap wax held to a flame. My father, Derek, let out a long, exhausted sigh and slumped onto the living room sofa, immediately rubbing his temples. Chloe ripped the medical collar off her neck and threw it onto a velvet chair, complaining loudly that the cheap plastic was making her skin break out in a rash. Brenda dropped her shoulders, the elegant matriarch persona vanishing completely as she kicked off her high heels and glared at the messy dining room. But Trent did not sit down. He did not relax. He walked straight past the living room and went directly to his designer leather briefcase, which he had left resting against the bottom step of the grand staircase. He snapped the brass locks open, the sound echoing sharply in the sudden quiet of the house. He reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents. I was standing at the edge of the dining room, quietly stacking the last of the dessert plates, when Trent marched back in. He did not say a word. He just walked up to the cleared section of the mahogany table and threw the heavy stack of paper down violently. The documents hit the polished wood with a loud smack, sliding slightly toward me. I stared down at the thick stack of stapled white paper resting on the polished mahogany wood. The harsh light from the crystal chandelier above cast sharp shadows across the pages. Trent stood on the opposite side of the table, leaning forward with both hands planted firmly on the edge, trying to physically dominate the space. His face was flushed with wine and sheer arrogance. He looked incredibly proud of himself, like a corporate shark who had just cornered a helpless victim in a boardroom. He had no idea he was standing in a room with a federal fraud investigator. "Sit down and read it," Trent commanded, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the dining room. "Or rather, just skip to the last page and sign your name." I had my lawyer draft this up this afternoon while you were busy serving pie. We are not playing games anymore, Simone. We are making this official. I slowly pulled out one of the heavy wooden dining chairs and sat down. I did not look at him immediately. I looked at my mother, Brenda, who had marched into the room and was now standing right behind Trent, her arms crossed over her chest, acting as his silent enforcer. I looked into the living room where my father Derek was keeping his head turned toward the dark television screen, deliberately ignoring the extortion taking place under his own roof. Chloe was sitting nearby watching me with a greedy, expectant gleam in her eyes, completely dropping the fragile victim routine now that the church guests were gone. I turned my attention back to the documents on the table. I reached out and pulled the stack toward me. As I flipped through the first few pages, my professional instincts immediately took over. Inside my head, I was mercilessly dissecting every single paragraph. It was not a legally sound document drafted by a real attorney. I had spent over a decade reviewing complex corporate contracts and federal subpoenas. I could spot an amateur template downloaded from the internet a mile away. The formatting was inconsistent, the legal jargon was incorrectly applied, and the clauses were wildly contradictory. Trent had combined two completely different legal concepts into one absurd document. The first half was a strict non-disclosure agreement, demanding my absolute silence regarding the events of the car crash, explicitly forbidding me from ever mentioning Chloe being the driver to any law enforcement agency, insurance provider, or public entity. The second half was an aggressive financial proxy, legally binding me to immediately surrender 70% of the total insurance payout directly to the corporate bank account of his failing cryptocurrency startup. He had even typed out his routing number and account number in bold black ink at the bottom of the page. It was a perfectly documented physical piece of evidence proving his intent to commit extortion and wire fraud. He had practically gift-wrapped his own prison sentence and handed it to me across the dining room table. "This is an interesting document, Trent," I said quietly, keeping my voice completely neutral. "You are asking for 70% of the replacement value of a $150,000 vehicle. That is over $100,000. That leaves me with almost nothing to replace the car I supposedly crashed." Trent let out a sharp, condescending laugh. He walked around the table, pulling up a chair right next to me, invading my personal space. He smelled heavily of expensive cologne and cheap desperation. "You do not need a luxury vehicle, Simone," he sneered, looking me up and down with utter contempt. "You drive from your boring apartment to your boring office. You can buy a used sedan with the remaining 30%. But that is not a request, by the way. That is the required payment for the massive trauma you have inflicted on my wife. You endangered her life. You caused her severe emotional distress." I looked at him calmly. "I caused her distress," I repeated, making sure he was articulating his fraudulent claims out loud. "Yes," Trent snapped, slamming his hand on the table to emphasize his point. "You are a reckless liability. If you refuse to sign that agreement right now, I will walk straight into the police station tomorrow morning. I will tell the investigators that my wife came to me crying and confessed the truth. I will tell them you forced her out of the car, took the wheel while you were heavily intoxicated, and caused the crash. I will tell them you threatened her to keep quiet. I will sue you in civil court for reckless endangerment and negligent infliction of emotional distress. I will bankrupt you, Simone. I will make sure you lose your little corporate job, and I will drag your name through the mud until you have absolutely nothing left." The sheer audacity of this white man sitting in my family home, threatening to weaponize the police against a black woman using a completely fabricated story, was staggering. But what was even more sickening was the reaction of my own mother. Brenda stepped forward, moving to stand right beside Trent. She did not tell him to leave her house. She did not defend her daughter. She looked down at me with eyes full of venom and impatience. "You heard him, Simone." My mother barked, her voice harsh and demanding. "Stop dragging this out and sign the paper. Trent is being more than generous by offering to keep this out of court and protect the family name. You owe Chloe this money. She is suffering because of this entire ordeal. If Trent leaves her because you are being stubborn and greedy, I will never forgive you. You will be dead to me. Do you understand? I will cut you out of this family forever." I looked up at her, studying the deep lines of anger on her face. For 35 years, she had used that exact threat to control me. The threat of abandonment, the threat of losing the family connection. She genuinely believed that being cast out of this toxic, abusive inner circle was my greatest fear. She did not realize that walking away from them was actually my ultimate goal. I let a heavy, suffocating silence fill the dining room. I needed them to feel the weight of this moment. I needed them to firmly commit to the crime without any hesitation. I reached into my purse and pulled out my digital tablet. I unlocked the screen and opened the official consumer portal for the National Automotive Insurance Registry. I navigated to the claims submission page and filled in the policy number for my mother's older vehicle, the date of the incident, and the narrative of the crash exactly as Chloe had described it at the hospital. I checked the boxes confirming the vehicle was a total loss and formally requesting a financial settlement evaluation. I placed the glowing tablet on the mahogany table right next to Trent's poorly drafted extortion contract. I picked up the expensive silver pen Trent had left beside the paper. I knew I needed to give them a performance. I needed to act like the broken, defeated scapegoat they fully expected me to be. I took a short, jagged breath. I made my hand tremble slightly as I hovered the tip of the pen over the signature line of the contract. I let my shoulders slump, perfectly mimicking the body language of someone who had just lost everything. Trent smiled a broad, triumphant grin. "That is a good girl," he mocked quietly. "Sign the paper, press, submit on the claim, and we can all move on with our lives." I looked at Trent, then I looked up at my mother. I kept my hand shaking as I held the pen. I widened my eyes, letting a look of deep, profound hesitation wash over my face. "Mom," I whispered, making my voice sound incredibly fragile and scared. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Brenda rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out a loud huff of frustration. "Oh my goodness, Simone, stop being so dramatic. Yes, I am sure. Sign the document and send the insurance form. We need this fixed right now." I did not move the pen. I stared directly into her eyes, offering her one final glaring opportunity to pull back from the edge of the cliff. "I just want you to be completely certain, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, hollow whisper. "Because once I sign this paper promising to wire the money, and once I press this green submit button on the federal insurance portal, the claim is officially registered in the national system. It triggers an automatic legal process. There is no taking it back. Once this is sent, whatever happens next is entirely out of my hands. Are you absolutely certain you want me to submit this claim?" My mother slammed her hands down on the back of Trent's chair and leaned over, her face inches from mine, completely blinded by her own greed and desperation. "Press the button, Simone," she yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the dining room. "Press the button and sign your name right now or get out of my house." I held her gaze for one more second. I stopped my hand from trembling. My posture straightened completely. The fragile, scared daughter vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating senior investigator. I pressed the silver pen firmly onto the paper and signed my name in smooth, dark ink. Then I reached out with my left index finger and pressed the bright green submit button on the digital tablet screen. The screen flashed. A large checkmark appeared, followed by a bold text notification that read, "Claim successfully submitted to the National Investigation Queue." "Okay," I said quietly, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. "It is done." Trent practically snatched the paper from beneath my hand the second the ink was dry. He held the document up to the light of the chandelier, his eyes scanning my signature to ensure I had not tried any last-minute tricks. A wide, arrogant smirk stretched across his flushed face. He folded the heavy paper precisely in half and slipped it into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He looked down at me with absolute triumph and called me an obedient fool. He actually had the audacity to tell me that if I had just listened to my betters in the first place, we could have avoided all this unpleasant tension. On the mahogany table, the screen of my digital tablet glowed brightly. The large green checkmark was still displayed prominently, accompanied by the word "Success" in bold lettering. My family stared at that screen as if it were a winning lottery ticket. They did not see a federal document. They did not understand the intricate web of compliance algorithms and automated fraud triggers I had just activated. All they saw was a massive payout. They saw free money funded entirely by my supposed weakness. The heavy, suffocating tension that had gripped the dining room instantly evaporated. My mother, Brenda, let out a dramatic, sweeping sigh of relief. She smoothed the front of her silk dress and suddenly transformed back into the picture of maternal warmth. She reached over and patted my shoulder, her touch feeling like ice against my skin. She told me I had finally made a mature decision. She said she was proud of me for putting my sister first, completely ignoring the fact that she had just threatened to disown me 5 minutes ago. My father, Derek, finally pushed himself off the living room sofa and ambled into the dining room. He gave me a weak, pathetic nod of approval, muttering something about how family always takes care of family. Chloe, miraculously cured of her debilitating neck pain and crippling trauma, clapped her manicured hands together in pure delight. She was already leaning into Trent, whispering excitedly about a new designer handbag collection dropping next week, spending the extortion money in her head before the digital claim had even reached a server. Trent decided this moment required a proper celebration. He walked over to the ornate wooden liquor cabinet in the corner of the room and pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne he had brought for Thanksgiving. He peeled back the gold foil and popped the cork. The loud, festive pop echoed sharply against the high ceilings. He retrieved 4 crystal flutes from the glass shelves and lined them up on the table. He poured the bubbling, golden liquid into the glasses. He handed the first glass to my mother, who accepted it with a radiant smile. He handed the second to my father, who took it eagerly. He handed the third to Chloe, kissing her on the cheek. He kept the 4th glass for himself. He deliberately left me sitting at the table with empty hands. It was a calculated, petty insult, a final reminder of my place in their hierarchy. I was the hired help. I was the scapegoat. I was simply the bank funding their elite lifestyle. Trent raised his crystal flute high in the air. He proposed a toast to family loyalty, to moving past unfortunate mistakes, and to highly profitable new business ventures. My parents and my sister enthusiastically raised their glasses, clinking the expensive crystal together in a chorus of cheerful agreement. They took long, satisfied sips of their champagne, their eyes completely blind to the reality of the situation. I sat perfectly still watching them drink. It was a surreal, almost cinematic moment. I was watching 4 people cheerfully celebrate their own federal indictment. They were toasting to a bank account that was about to be frozen. They were drinking to a business venture that was about to be seized by federal authorities. They thought they had successfully manipulated a naive data entry clerk. They had no idea they were throwing a victory party inside a locked cage. The sharp, rhythmic vibration of my cell phone broke my train of thought. The device was buried deep in the pocket of my slacks. I felt the distinct double buzz that indicated a high-priority encrypted notification from my secure corporate server. I pushed my chair back from the table, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floor. The sound barely registered over their laughter. I stood up and smoothed my clothes. I told them I was feeling exhausted from the long day and was going to retire to my room for the night. My mother waved me off dismissively, without even looking in my direction. Trent gave me a final condescending smirk, telling me to get some rest because I had a lot of car shopping to do. I turned my back on the dining room and walked into the dimly lit hallway. The sound of their celebration faded slightly as I put distance between us. I leaned against the cool plaster wall near the staircase and pulled the phone from my pocket. I bypassed the standard lock screen and opened my secure federal communications application. The message was from the regional director of the National Insurance Fraud Investigation Bureau. He was my direct superior, a man who had spent 30 years dismantling organized crime syndicates and corporate fraud rings. He was not a man who handed out praise lightly. I stared at the glowing text on the screen. The message was brief, professional, and absolutely devastating. It stated that the claim I had just submitted from the dining room table had been instantly flagged by the system due to the lapsed policy status and the attached audio evidence I had uploaded earlier. The message confirmed that a highly classified federal case file had been officially activated under the names of Brenda Washington and Trent Vance. I read the final two sentences of the message and a cold, genuine thrill ran down my spine. The regional director informed me that a specialized corporate task force accompanied by local law enforcement would be deployed to my family residence first thing Monday morning to execute the warrants. The message ended with a simple sign-off. It said the trap was perfectly set, and it congratulated me on a job flawlessly executed. I locked my phone screen and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked back toward the dining room, where the faint sound of clinking crystal and arrogant laughter continued to echo. They had exactly one weekend left to enjoy their stolen peace. Come Monday morning, their entire world was going to burn to the ground, and I was going to be the one holding the match. The rest of the holiday weekend unfolded like a bizarre theatrical production where everyone was playing a role they had not rehearsed for a tragedy. Friday morning arrived with a crisp autumn breeze, and the atmosphere inside the house was thick with unearned arrogance. Trent strutted around the gourmet kitchen in his expensive cashmere sweater, making loud business calls on his phone. He deliberately paced past me while I was drinking my morning coffee, boasting to his imaginary investors that a massive influx of capital was clearing by next week, and that his cryptocurrency startup was back on track. He was spending the phantom insurance money before the federal servers had even finished processing his digital footprint. He even had the nerve to ask me to fetch him a bottle of sparkling water from the refrigerator while he was on a call, snapping his fingers at me as if I were a servant. I handed him the water with a polite smile, knowing it would be the last drink he enjoyed as a free man. My mother Brenda was equally insufferable. She spent her Friday afternoons sitting in the sunroom flipping through glossy automotive magazines, loudly debating whether she should replace her totaled SUV with a newer Range Rover or upgrade to a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. She asked my father for his opinion, entirely ignoring the fact that the crushed shell of her uninsured vehicle was still sitting in the local municipal impound lot, racking up daily storage fees she absolutely could not afford. She acted as though I had just handed her a winning lottery ticket instead of a signed confession to a federal crime. She even called her friends from the country club, bragging about how the insurance company was taking full care of the terrible accident, building her web of lies higher and higher. But the absolute peak of the delusion belonged to Chloe. By Saturday afternoon, her miraculous recovery from her imaginary whiplash was fully complete. The rigid medical collar was nowhere to be seen. She announced she was going to Lenox Square Mall to do some retail therapy to soothe her lingering emotional trauma. When she returned a few hours later, she could barely carry all the glossy shopping bags through the front door. I sat quietly on the living room sofa, pretending to read a novel, as she dumped heavy bags from Prada, Gucci, and Neiman Marcus onto the coffee table. She pulled out a pair of $1,000 leather boots and a highly sought-after designer handbag, parading them around the living room for our mother to admire. She looked over at me, her eyes gleaming with a nasty, triumphant light. She told me she had put everything on Trent's high-interest credit cards. She said she felt totally comfortable maxing them out because she knew my insurance wire transfer was going to pay off the balances in a few days anyway. She actually thanked me for funding her winter wardrobe, telling me it was the least I could do for almost ruining her marriage. I simply turned the page of my book and told her I hoped she kept the receipts in a safe place. She laughed, thinking it was a bitter, jealous comment from her poor older sister, completely unaware that those receipts were going to be seized as evidence of credit card fraud by Tuesday afternoon. I spent my entire weekend operating in the shadows of their loud, obnoxious victory lap. While they were busy celebrating their successful extortion, I was meticulously preparing my exit strategy. Every time I retreated to the upstairs guest bedroom, I quietly went to work. I did not want to leave a single trace of my presence in this house once the hammer fell. I pulled my hard-shell suitcase from the closet and began systematically packing my belongings. I folded my clothes perfectly, tucking them into the hidden compartments. I packed my expensive toiletries, leaving only cheap travel-sized decoys on the bathroom counter, so my mother would not suspect I was preparing to leave. I securely stowed my encrypted federal laptop and my digital tablet in my protective briefcase, locking the combination dials. I even took a damp cloth and wiped down the mahogany desk and the nightstand, a purely psychological gesture to erase myself from their toxic environment. When everything was perfectly packed, I pushed the heavy suitcase deep under the guest bed, hiding it completely behind the long, hanging fabric of the bed skirt. Sunday evening arrived, bringing a suffocating, heavy stillness to the house. It was the final family dinner before Trent and Chloe were supposed to return to their own home the next morning. My mother had prepared a lavish spread of leftovers from Thanksgiving, presenting the meal as if she were a queen feeding her loyal subjects. We sat around the same mahogany dining table where I had pressed the submit button 48 hours earlier. The conversation was entirely focused on the future. Trent mapped out his brilliant financial strategy, explaining how my $100,000 wire transfer was going to save his company and double his net worth by the end of the quarter. My mother chimed in, reminding him that a portion of that money needed to be set aside for Chloe to have a proper luxury spa retreat to recover from her ordeal. My father just chewed his food in silence, perfectly content to let his eldest daughter be financially destroyed as long as he did not have to deal with any conflict in his home. They looked so incredibly smug. They looked like people who believed they had fundamentally beaten the system. They believed that because they lived in a big brick house in a wealthy suburb, and because they dressed well and went to the right megachurch, the rules simply did not apply to them. They thought their privilege was an impenetrable shield against consequence. I ate my dinner quietly, offering agreeable nods whenever Trent or my mother addressed me. I played the part of the defeated, compliant scapegoat right up until the very last second. When dinner was over, I offered to wash the dishes. My mother accepted my offer without a thank you, taking Trent and Chloe into the living room to drink more expensive wine and watch a movie. I stood at the kitchen sink washing the heavy ceramic plates in the warm, soapy water, looking out the window into the dark, quiet street, knowing exactly what was coming down that road in just a few hours. I slept deeply and peacefully that Sunday night. I did not toss and turn with anxiety. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for what I had set in motion. I woke up on Monday morning before the sun had even fully risen. I took a quick shower, dressed in a sharp, tailored black business suit, and pulled my hair back into a sleek, professional bun. I slid my feet into my leather heels. I reached under the bed and pulled out my packed suitcase, leaving it standing upright by the bedroom door, ready to be rolled out. I walked downstairs and found the house completely quiet. It was exactly 7:30 in the morning. My parents were still asleep in the master bedroom. Trent and Chloe were asleep in the other guest room down the hall. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the expensive espresso machine, and brewed myself a strong black coffee. I poured it into a travel mug and walked out to the foyer. I stood right by the grand sweeping staircase, perfectly positioned between the heavy mahogany front door and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. I looked at the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner of the entryway. The long brass pendulum swung back and forth, ticking away the final seconds of my family delusion. 7:58. 7:59. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee, letting the dark, bitter taste ground me in the reality of the moment. I smoothed the lapel of my black suit jacket and stood up perfectly straight. Exactly at 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy silence of the affluent suburban house was violently shattered. The doorbell did not just ring once. It rang in a rapid, aggressive, unrelenting succession that echoed off the high ceilings like a fire alarm. Seconds later, a heavy fist began pounding relentlessly against the solid wood of the front door, shaking the frosted glass side panels in their frames. The storm had finally arrived. The heavy, aggressive pounding on the front door echoed through the quiet suburban house like a death knell. From my vantage point in the shadows of the second-floor landing, I had a perfect view of the grand foyer below. Footsteps hurried down the carpeted hallway. My mother Brenda was the first to rush down the sweeping staircase. She was wearing her expensive silk morning robe, frantically smoothing her hair and adjusting her collar. She was desperately trying to project the image of a wealthy, put-together matriarch preparing to welcome the insurance adjusters she believed were bringing her a massive settlement check. Right behind her was Trent. My white brother-in-law descended the stairs with an unmistakable air of arrogant authority. He was already dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, looking exactly like a man ready to close a lucrative corporate deal. He marched toward the door with his chest puffed out, completely wrapped in his delusion of control. He leaned over to my mother and whispered that he would handle the adjusters, boasting that he knew exactly how to pressure these low-level corporate workers into cutting the $100,000 check immediately. I stood perfectly still in the dim light of the hallway, holding my travel mug filled with hot black coffee. I did not make a sound. My father, Derek, stumbled out of the living room, rubbing his eyes and groaning about the noise. Chloe was still fast asleep upstairs, completely oblivious that her designer shopping spree was about to become federal evidence. My mother took a deep breath, plastered on her most convincing radiant fake smile, and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. She pulled the thick oak door open, ready to welcome her payday, but her smile instantly froze, her facial muscles locking in a mask of pure shock. Standing on the front porch were not the timid insurance clerks she had expected. Standing there was a wall of absolute, terrifying federal authority. There were 3 agents dressed in immaculate pitch-black suits, their expressions carved from stone. Right behind them stood 2 fully uniformed city police officers, their hands resting casually on their utility belts near their radios and handcuffs. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol cruisers parked on the street painted the walls of our foyer, completely destroying the peaceful morning aesthetic my mother prized so highly. Brenda physically stumbled backward. All of her fake confidence evaporated in a single second. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She had spent her entire life intimidating retail workers and church volunteers, but she had absolutely no idea how to handle real power. Trent, however, was blinded by his own privilege. He pushed past my trembling mother and stepped right into the doorway, physically blocking the entrance. He looked at the federal agents with deep annoyance, as if they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience interrupting his busy schedule. He loudly demanded to know why they had brought local police to a simple insurance claim inspection. He crossed his arms over his chest and told them he was the legal representative for the family. He ordered the agents to go look at the crushed vehicle on the lawn, write up their total loss report, and process the paperwork immediately so his business funding would not be delayed. The audacity of his demands hung heavily in the crisp morning air. He truly believed he could bully these people into submission. The lead investigator, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp gray hair and piercing eyes, did not flinch. He looked at Trent with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. The agent reached into the inner pocket of his black suit jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. With a swift flick of his wrist, he let it fall open, revealing a gleaming silver badge that bore the seal of the National Insurance Fraud Investigation Bureau. The agent spoke in a deep, commanding voice that carried the full, undeniable weight of the federal government. He looked Trent dead in the eye and stated clearly that they were not there for him. He explained that they had not come to process any payments. He said they were standing on this porch to report directly to their director and receive their final orders before executing the crime scene protocols. Trent dropped his arms. His face went completely slack. The color drained from his cheeks as his brain desperately tried to process the words. My mother let out a small, terrified gasp. Director! They had no idea what the agent was talking about. The foyer fell into a suffocating dead silence, broken only by the ticking of the antique grandfather clock. That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows and began my descent down the grand staircase. The sharp, rhythmic click of my leather heels striking the hardwood steps echoed like a countdown. I was not wearing my casual sweatpants anymore. I was dressed in a tailored jet black power suit that fit me perfectly. My hair was pulled back into a severe professional bun. I held my coffee mug in one hand, radiating a cold, untouchable authority. When I stepped into the bright light of the foyer, the reaction from my family was instantaneous and absolute. My father dropped his jaw, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. My mother shrank against the wall, her eyes wide with a manic, uncomprehending terror as she stared at the daughter she had spent 35 years calling useless. Trent swallowed hard, stepping back from the door as I approached. I did not look at any of them. I walked straight past my trembling mother and the terrified man who had threatened to ruin my life just 12 hours ago. I stepped onto the porch and stopped directly in front of the lead agent. The gray-haired investigator immediately stood at attention, snapping his leather wallet shut. He offered me a respectful nod and said, "Good morning, Director Washington." He confirmed that the task force was in position. The perimeter was secured, and all digital assets belonging to the suspects had been successfully frozen pending my final authorization. I gave him a sharp professional smile. I told him he had done excellent work, Agent Miller, and thanked him for arriving exactly on time. I reached out and shook his hand firmly, then nodded to the two police officers standing behind him. Behind me, the air in the house seemed to shatter. My mother let out a choked, hysterical sob. She screamed my name, her voice cracking with sheer panic. She demanded to know what was going on, why these men were calling me director, and what they were doing at her house. Trent completely lost his mind. His face turned a dark, furious red. He pointed a shaking finger at my back and began shouting that this was all a sick, elaborate prank. He yelled that I had hired actors to scare them so I could get out of paying the $100,000 I legally owed him. He was literally watching his entire life collapse, and his ego still refused to accept defeat. I turned around slowly, taking a measured sip of my black coffee. The bitter heat grounded me perfectly in the moment. I lowered the mug and looked directly at the people who had made it their life mission to break me. All the warmth, all the hesitation, and all the fake submission I had displayed over the weekend vanished from my face. I looked at Trent, watching the sweat bead on his forehead. I looked at my mother, watching her silk robe tremble as she hyperventilated against the wall. I spoke slowly, ensuring every single word landed with devastating precision. I told them to meet my investigative task force. I explained that for the last 10 years I had not been pushing papers in a cubicle. I told them I was the senior director of the National Insurance Fraud Investigation Bureau. I watched their eyes widen as the reality of my words finally crushed through their denial. I looked right into my mother's terrified eyes and offered her a cold, empty smile. I welcomed her to her very own federal insurance fraud investigation. I told her that she and Trent were now the primary suspects in a felony conspiracy case. Finally, I congratulated my entire family on successfully extorting a federal agent and signing their own arrest warrants. Trent shook his head violently, his face contorting into a mask of desperate denial. He took a step forward, raising his hands as if he could physically push my words away. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely no humor. He pointed at my federal agents and then pointed directly at my face, his voice rising in pitch as he tried to regain control of a room that no longer belonged to him. "You are completely out of your mind." Trent spat, his chest heaving. "I do not care what your fancy job title is. I do not care if you brought the entire federal government to this house. You are just trying to intimidate us with a flashy badge because you are too cheap to pay what you owe. The facts have not changed, Simone. Your car was destroyed. Chloe was driving it, sure, but it is your vehicle and your insurance policy. The liability falls on the owner of the asset. You signed the police report taking responsibility. You filed the claim. You are the one who is going to pay up, and if you try to back out now using these goons, I will sue you for everything you are worth." He looked incredibly proud of his amateur legal analysis. He actually thought he had found a loophole in my federal trap. He thought the physical reality of the crashed metal on the front lawn was his ultimate trump card. My mother latched on to his words like a drowning woman grabbing a life preserver. She stood up a little straighter, her breathing still ragged, but a flicker of her old arrogance returning to her eyes. "He is right!" Brenda snapped, her voice trembling but defiant. "It is your car out there, Simone. You cannot just arrest us to get out of paying for your own vehicle. That is abuse of power. I will call my lawyer. I will call the news stations. You are going to look like a complete fool when everyone finds out you are using federal resources to cover up a family traffic accident." I listened to their desperate, pathetic threats with absolute serenity. I did not interrupt them. I let them exhaust their remaining oxygen on foolish arguments. When my mother finally stopped talking, the foyer fell silent once again, save for the steady, heavy breathing of the two suspects standing before me. I reached into the pocket of my tailored suit jacket. My fingers closed around the smooth, heavy plastic and metal of the device I had been carrying all weekend. I pulled my hand out and held it up for them to see. I opened my palm. Resting perfectly in the center of my hand was a pristine, unmodified standard black leather key fob. It bore the silver emblem of a brand new Range Rover. Trent frowned, his eyes darting between my hand and my face. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice losing some of its aggressive edge. I walked slowly toward the antique console table positioned against the wall of the foyer. I lifted my hand and dropped the key fob onto the polished wood. The heavy thud of the metal and plastic hitting the table echoed loudly in the quiet space. "This is the key to my vehicle," I stated plainly, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "The real key." My mother stared at the object on the table, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "But I took your keys," she whispered, almost to herself. "I took them from your purse on Thanksgiving night. They had that sparkly diamond shell on them." I handed them directly to Chloe. I turned to face her, folding my arms neatly across my chest. "You took exactly what I wanted you to take, Mom," I replied smoothly. "When I arrived for Thanksgiving, I saw the way you looked at my new car. I saw the bitter jealousy in your eyes. I knew your financial situation was a complete disaster. I knew your own SUV was sitting in the driveway completely useless because you could not afford to keep it on the road. And I knew that when Chloe inevitably created a crisis, you would look for the easiest, most expensive asset to sacrifice in order to save her." I took a slow step toward my mother, watching her shrink back against the wall. "So on Thanksgiving afternoon, while you were busy gossiping on your phone and ignoring my presence, I went into your purse. I found your spare key fob, the one that belongs to your older, outdated model. They look remarkably similar in size and shape. I simply removed the decorative rhinestone shell from my key and snapped it onto yours. I placed your disguised key into my tote bag, and I kept my real key safely in my pocket." Trent's face went completely blank. His jaw went slack as his brain struggled to process the timeline of events I was laying out. He looked out the frosted glass of the front door, his eyes wide with a sudden horrifying realization. "When you sneaked into the living room at 1 in the morning, I continued, my voice cold and unrelenting. You were in such a frantic rush to play the hero that you did not bother to check the buttons. You did not bother to verify the vehicle. You just grabbed the shiny object and handed it to your golden child." Chloe was too intoxicated and panicked to notice the interior differences in the dark. She just pressed the ignition, put the car in drive, and barreled straight into a brick wall of reality. The air in the foyer became completely unbreathable. My father, Derek, let out a long, ragged groan and sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying his face in his hands. He understood. Even in his cowardice, he finally understood the magnitude of the trap they had walked into. But Trent was still fighting. He was still trying to cling to the wreckage of his extortion plot. "No," he stammered, shaking his head rapidly. "No, that does not make any sense. We saw the police report. You claimed the accident. You submitted the insurance file. I saw you press the button on the tablet. You saw me submit a claim to the National Investigation Queue. I corrected him sharply, dropping the gentle tone entirely. I used the policy number attached to my mother vehicle. I documented the exact narrative Chloe provided to me at the hospital. I attached the audio recording of you demanding $100,000 from the payout. I gave you every opportunity to walk away, Trent. I asked my mother if she was absolutely certain she wanted me to submit that file. She screamed at me to do it. You both aggressively ordered me to commit federal wire fraud on your behalf. Trent stumbled backward, his shoulders hitting the heavy oak door. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was finally realizing there was no net waiting for him at the bottom. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The only sound was the distant hum of the police cruiser engines idling on the street outside. I looked at my mother. Her face was gray. Her perfect morning facade was completely destroyed. The reality of her actions was crashing down on her all at once. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate pleading terror. Simone, she choked out tears, finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. Simone, please, you cannot do this to me. I stepped closer to her, ensuring she heard every single syllable of her punishment. The crushed car sitting out there on the neighbor lawn is not my car, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. It is your car, Mom. It is your vehicle that Chloe destroyed. And because your insurance policy was officially canceled for non-payment exactly 32 days ago, there is no corporate safety net. There is no settlement check coming. You are going to have to pay for the towing. You are going to have to pay for the destroyed property line. And you are going to have to reach into your empty bank accounts and pay out of pocket to replace Mr. Henderson's $100,000 Tesla. I paused, letting the crushing weight of that financial ruin settle firmly onto her shoulders. And that is just the civil liability, I added coldly. The federal agents standing on this porch are here for the criminal charges. You tried to extort a federal investigator. You conspired to commit fraud. You are going to lose everything, Mom. And you did it all by yourself. My mother slid down the elegant patterned wallpaper, collapsing into a pathetic, trembling heap on the polished hardwood floor. Her expensive silk robe pooled around her as she buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy suburban life was actively burning to the ground, and she was finally feeling the intense heat of the flames. My father remained frozen on the bottom step of the staircase, his eyes wide and vacant, completely paralyzed by his own lifelong cowardice. But I was not finished. I turned my attention away from my weeping parents and focused entirely on Trent. He was still pressed hard against the heavy oak front door, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. His designer suit suddenly looked entirely too big for him. The arrogant, condescending tech bro who had stood in my dining room and threatened to destroy my life was gone. In his place was a cornered, desperate animal calculating his chances of survival. I walked smoothly over to my hard-shell briefcase, which I had placed near the antique grandfather clock earlier that morning. I clicked the brass combination locks, the sharp metallic snaps echoing in the quiet foyer. I pulled out my encrypted federal laptop and carried it over to the console table, setting it down right next to the pristine key fob. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, and the screen instantly glowed to life, casting a pale blue light across my face. You see, Trent, I began, my voice perfectly level and conversational. Filling a fraudulent insurance claim was only the financial side of this investigation. As a federal agent, I am also required to establish the exact mechanics of the physical collision to determine liability, and your version of the story always had a few glaring structural flaws. Trent swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the glowing screen. What are you talking about? He croaked, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. Chloe told you what happened. She swerved to miss an animal. It was a tragic accident. I shook my head slowly, offering him a smile completely devoid of warmth. I told him that 6 months ago, after my mother had carelessly backed her vehicle into a neighborhood mailbox, and aggressively tried to blame the postal worker to avoid paying for the damage my professional paranoia had officially kicked in. I knew it was only a matter of time before her reckless behavior escalated into a massive liability. So while she was at one of her lengthy church services, I took the liberty of hardwiring a state-of-the-art dual-facing dash camera directly behind the rearview mirror of her car. I programmed the device to remain completely dark, with no blinking recording lights, and set it to automatically sync every single second of high-definition video and audio directly to my secure cloud server. My mother stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her head snapping up to look at me in absolute horror. She had been driving around for half a year, completely unaware that her most despised daughter had a crystal-clear window into her daily life. When you and my mother forced me to submit that insurance claim yesterday, I continued tapping a few keys on my laptop to pull up the video file. I did not just send a digital form. I attached the synchronized video footage from the exact moment of the crash. The federal system analyzed the footage instantly. I turned the laptop around so the bright screen was facing Trent, my parents, and the federal agents standing on the porch. I reached out and pressed the spacebar to initiate playback. The audio kicked in first, loud and crisp. It was not the sound of a terrified woman crying over her failing marriage. It was the sound of heavy rhythmic club music pulsing through the car speakers, accompanied by the distinct, unmistakable sound of a woman laughing hysterically. The video feed from the interior camera illuminated the screen. It was time-stamped at 1:15 in the morning. Chloe was sitting in the driver's seat wearing a tight, sparkling party dress. Her makeup was slightly smeared and she looked completely intoxicated. But the most damning detail was not her obvious inebriation. It was the fact that she was not alone in the vehicle. Sitting in the passenger seat was a tall, muscular man with dark hair wearing a designer leather jacket. It was absolutely not her husband. The man was leaning across the center console, kissing Chloe passionately on the neck while she drove, her hands barely resting on the steering wheel. A sharp, collective gasp echoed through the foyer. My father covered his mouth with his trembling hand. My mother stared at the screen, her eyes bulging as she watched her precious, perfect golden child casually destroying her marriage vows on high-definition federal evidence. But the video was not over. On the screen, the mood inside the car shifted violently in a fraction of a second. The interior cabin was suddenly flooded with a blinding, aggressive white light coming from the rear window. Chloe squinted and looked up at the rearview mirror. Her drunken laughter abruptly stopped, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The man in the passenger seat turned around to look out the back window, shouting a warning. I tapped a key on my laptop, seamlessly switching the video feed from the interior cabin view to the exterior rear-facing camera. The footage showed a dark, heavy sedan aggressively riding the bumper of my mother's vehicle. The sedan swerved erratically, crossing the double yellow lines before accelerating rapidly and pulling up alongside the driver's side window. The streetlights illuminated the aggressive vehicle perfectly. It was a black Tesla, the exact same black sedan that was currently parked in our driveway. I paused the video right as the sedan pulled parallel to Chloe. I zoomed in on the driver's seat of the attacking vehicle and enhanced the image. The high-resolution camera captured the face of the driver with terrifying clarity. It was Trent. His face was twisted into a mask of pure homicidal rage. He was gripping his steering wheel so hard his knuckles were stark white. He had obviously tracked his wife to the downtown club, watched her leave with another man, and followed them into the dark residential streets with the absolute intention of inflicting severe harm. I hit play again. The video showed Trent violently jerking his steering wheel to the right. His heavy sedan slammed aggressively into the side of the SUV. Inside the cabin, the audio captured the deafening crunch of metal. The man in the passenger seat panicked, reaching across the console and grabbing Chloe by her right upper arm, with extreme force to brace himself for the impact, perfectly explaining the deep, violent bruises Dr. Aris had discovered at the hospital. The massive force of Trent ramming the vehicle sent the SUV completely out of control. The exterior camera showed the vehicle jumping the concrete curb, tearing through the wooden fence and plowing headfirst into the parked luxury car. The interior camera showed the explosive deployment of the white airbags, followed by total suffocating darkness and the sound of hissing radiator fluid. The final few seconds of the rear-facing camera showed Trent slamming on his brakes, staring at the horrific wreckage he had just caused for a brief moment, before hitting the gas and speeding away into the night, abandoning his wife and her lover in a crushed, smoking vehicle. I pressed the spacebar, stopping the video and plunging the foyer back into silence. "You did not stay at home while your distressed wife took a drive, Trent?" I stated, my voice echoing like a judge delivering a final verdict. "You hunted her down. You committed vehicular assault. You caused a catastrophic collision. You committed a felony hit and run. And then you came into this house and aggressively orchestrated a federal extortion plot against me to pay for the damages you personally caused while simultaneously trying to steal $100,000 to fund your failing startup. You are not a brilliant tech entrepreneur. You are a violent, desperate criminal, and your entire life is over." For 2 full seconds, Trent did not move. He stared at the frozen image of his own enraged face on my laptop screen. The realization that every single one of his lies had been meticulously documented and handed to the federal government completely shattered his mind. The carefully constructed mask of the superior, untouchable white corporate businessman dissolved, leaving nothing but raw, explosive violence. A guttural, primal roar ripped from Trent's throat. It was the sound of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. His eyes rolled back with pure fury, and he pushed off the heavy oak door with massive force. He lunged directly across the foyer, his hands outstretched, his fingers curled into tight claws, aimed squarely at my throat. He intended to strangle me right there in front of my parents and the federal agents. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood my ground, maintaining direct eye contact with the monster rushing toward me. Trent did not even make it halfway across the polished hardwood floor. Before his hands could come anywhere near my suit jacket, the 2 uniformed city police officers exploded into action. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. The larger officer lunged forward, driving his shoulder directly into Trent midsection with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked the wind out of Trent in a loud, wet gasp. The second officer grabbed Trent's right arm, twisting it violently behind his back. The combined momentum of the tackle sent all 3 men crashing heavily onto the floor right at my feet. The impact shook the floorboards and rattled the crystal pieces of the chandelier above us. Trent thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities, his face pressed hard against the expensive Persian rug. But he was completely outmatched. The officers drove their heavy knees into his back, pinning him firmly to the ground. The sharp, unmistakable ratcheting sound of solid steel handcuffs clicking tightly around Trent's wrists echoed through the foyer, signaling the absolute and final end of his reign of terror. Trent's screams of rage morphed into desperate, breathless grunts as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The reality of his physical restraint finally broke the spell of his arrogance. At that exact moment, the commotion in the foyer drew the last remaining member of our toxic family out of hiding. Chloe appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her hair disheveled, wrapped in a plush robe. She rubbed her eyes, complaining about the noise, completely unaware that she was walking directly into a federal crime scene. She looked down at the foyer and froze. She saw her husband pinned to the hardwood floor by 2 uniformed police officers. She saw our mother weeping hysterically against the wall. And then her eyes landed on the bright screen of my laptop sitting on the console table, still paused on the enhanced image of Trent ramming her car while she was wrapped in the arms of another man. Trent craned his neck upward. His face scraped against the rug and locked eyes with his wife. He unleashed a barrage of venomous insults, screaming that he knew everything about her affair. He called her a worthless, cheating liar. He shouted that he was going to leave her with absolutely nothing and make sure everyone in her precious social circle knew exactly what kind of woman she really was. Chloe let out a piercing, theatrical shriek. She collapsed onto the carpeted stairs, sobbing wildly, not because she felt guilty for her betrayal, but because her limitless credit cards, her luxury shopping sprees, and her golden child status were evaporating right before her eyes. Agent Miller stepped forward, his leather shoes crunching over the unseen debris of my family's shattered egos. He looked down at Trent and began reading him his Miranda rights in a voice that was pure clinical authority. He formally charged Trent with aggravated vehicular assault, felony hit and run extortion, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The police officers hauled Trent to his feet, roughly ignoring his demands to call his completely useless corporate lawyer. Then Agent Miller turned his cold gaze toward my mother. Brenda pressed herself harder against the wall, shaking her head in frantic denial as the second federal agent approached her holding a pair of handcuffs. Agent Miller read her rights next. He charged my own mother with insurance fraud conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and subornation of perjury for forcing me to lie on a police report. "Please, you cannot do this," Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking as the agent gently but firmly pulled her arms behind her back. "I am a respected member of my church. I host charity dinners. I cannot go to jail in my silk robe. What will the neighbors think?" Even as the cold steel locked around her wrists, her only genuine concern was her social standing. She was not sorry for stealing from me. She was not sorry for trying to ruin my life to save her golden child. She was only sorry that the entire neighborhood was watching her get arrested from their front windows. As the officers began to march my mother and Trent toward the front door, my father finally broke. Derek stumbled forward from the bottom of the stairs, his face pale and streaked with tears. He threw himself onto his knees right in front of me, his hands clasped together in a desperate, pathetic prayer. "Simone, please," he begged, his voice a broken, raspy whisper. "You are the director. You have the power to stop this. I know you do. Please just tell them to withdraw the files. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. She is your mother, Simone. Chloe is your sister. We are your family. You cannot just let them take your family away to a federal prison. I will do anything you want. I will make sure they pay you back every single penny. Just stop them, please." I looked down at the man who had supposedly been my protector for my entire life. I looked at his hunched shoulders and his tear-stained face. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I felt entirely liberated. I stepped around him and walked up the first few steps of the staircase to retrieve my packed suitcase, which I had left resting on the landing earlier that morning. I grabbed the sturdy handle, rolled it down the steps, and stopped right in front of my kneeling father. "I cannot stop a federal indictment, Dad," I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of any emotion. "The system does not work for you, just because you live in a big house. And even if I could stop it, I absolutely would not." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How can you be so cold?" he whimpered. I leaned down slightly, making sure he heard my final words with crystal clarity. "You watched them trample me for 35 years, I told him. You sat at that dining room table and watched my mother tear my self-esteem to shreds. You watched Trent hurl racist insults at me on this very porch. You listened to them plot to extort me for $100,000, and you did not say a single word. You chose to be blind because it was easier for you. So do not beg me for mercy now. You wanted to keep the peace at my expense. Now you get to sit in this big empty house and watch them pay the price." I turned my back on him. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and walked out the heavy oak front door, stepping out onto the concrete porch and into the bright, crisp morning air. The scene outside was a chaotic masterpiece. The two police officers were shoving Trent into the back of a squad car, completely ignoring his frantic threats. A federal agent was guiding my weeping, handcuffed mother toward a black government SUV. Neighbors in their bathrobes were standing on their manicured lawns, recording the entire spectacle on their smartphones. My mother, pristine, untouchable reputation was bleeding out on the suburban asphalt for everyone to see. I walked down the driveway, the wheels of my suitcase clicking smoothly against the pavement. I did not look at the crushed remains of my mother's uninsured vehicle sitting on the grass. I did not look at Trent or Chloe. I reached the sidewalk and turned right, walking about half a block away from the circus of flashing lights. I stopped under the shade of a large oak tree. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the real pristine key fob. I pressed the unlock button twice. Across the street, parked safely away from the carnage, my actual $150,000 Range Rover Autobiography chirped happily. The brilliant LED headlights flashed, reflecting brightly in the morning sun. The sleek black exterior was completely flawless. It had never been anywhere near my mother or her reckless golden child. It was safe, fully insured, and completely mine. I walked over to the luxurious SUV, opened the trunk, and tossed my suitcase inside. I closed the heavy door with a solid, satisfying thud. I climbed into the driver's seat, sinking into the premium leather. The cabin smelled like expensive new car, an absolute victory. I pressed the ignition button, and the powerful engine roared to life with a smooth, deep purr. I reached into the center console and pulled out a pair of dark designer sunglasses, sliding them over my eyes. I tapped the touchscreen display and queued up my favorite smooth R&B playlist. A heavy rhythmic bass line filled the cabin, perfectly matching the steady, calm beating of my heart. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. In my rear-view mirror, I could see the flashing lights of the police cruisers preparing to transport my mother and my brother-in-law to the downtown precinct for booking. I could hear the faint, distant sound of my sister crying on the front steps. I drove straight out of that wealthy, toxic neighborhood. I rolled down my window, letting the cool autumn wind blow through the cabin. I did not feel an ounce of regret. I had finally stopped being their scapegoat, and I was never ever looking back. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that sharing blood does not give anyone the right to disrespect or exploit you. For years, I tried to shrink myself to fit into their toxic narrative because I thought that was what family required. But true power comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to be the sacrificial lamb for the mistakes of other people. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and let toxic people face the brutal consequences of their own actions. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace? Share your survival stories in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button if you believe in choosing yourself.